The moment I snapped that heavy-duty master lock onto the new iron gate, I knew I'd just declared a full-blown war. But honestly, after watching 15 complete strangers treat my backyard like a public water park for 3 weeks, I was ready to burn every bridge in this neighborhood. I'd spent my entire life savings on this 5-acre slice of Montana heaven, a place with a lake so clear you can see the trout resting on the bottom, only to find out that the local HOA president, a woman named Beverly, who clearly had too much time and not enough soul, thought my property deed was more of a, suggestion, than a legal document. She stood there on the other side of the fence, her face turning a shade of purple I didn't know humans could achieve, screaming that she had, rights, But what she didn't realize was that I had the title, the receipts, and a legal team that was about to turn her little suburban dictatorship into a very expensive memory. Let's back up a second, because 6 months ago, I really thought I'd hit the lottery. I'd been living in a cramped apartment in Seattle for a decade, saving every cent to find a place where the only neighbors I'd have to deal with were the deer and the occasional hawk. When I saw this property, 5 acres of private fishing lake and a cabin that looked like something out of a postcard, I didn't oppose to even hesitate. The previous owner, a sweet old guy named Mr. Henderson, was headed to a retirement home and told me the neighborhood was, active, which I took to mean people like to jog. During the walkthrough, the HOA seemed like your standard suburban nuisance. Keep your grass mowed, don an oppos. T-paint your house neon pink, the usual stuff. So I signed the papers, shook hands, and moved in thinking I'd finally found my peace. The first hint that things were weird happened about 10 days after I moved in. I woke up at 5:30 in the morning to the sound of low voices and the unmistakable clink of a beer can opening right outside my bedroom window. I looked out, heart racing, thinking maybe there were burglars, but instead, I saw 2 guys in full camo sitting on my private dock, casting lines into my lake like they'd been there their whole lives. I threw on some boots and stumbled out there, trying to be the, nice new neighbor, and just said, hey guys, maybe you didn't oppose, TC the sign, but this is private property now, One of the guys didn't oppose. To even turn around, he just took a long pull of his coffee and said, Henderson lets us fish the sunrise, buddy, you oppose. Refine, And when I told him Henderson didn't oppose to own the place anymore, they both gave me this look of pure, unadulterated disgust, like I was the one trespassing on their morning. It didn't oppose. T stopped there, though. It actually got way worse. Over the next month, I'd come home from work to find entire families having picnics on my lawn, kids swimming in the lake without life jackets, and once, I even found a group of teenagers having a literal bonfire on the shore. Every time I tried to explain that I was the owner and that I was worried about the liability. I mean, if a kid drowns in my lake, that's on me. They'd act like I was being a total, Karen. Then came the notes in my mailbox and signed slips of paper saying things like, we were here first, and, Don and Oppos, TB is selfish city slicker, And that's when I realized the community didn't oppose. T just used the lake. They felt they owned it. Then I met Beverly. She was the HOA president, the kind of woman who wears crisp white tennis skirts, even when she's never held a racket, and has a smile that feels like it was sharpened on a whetstone. She cornered me at the mailboxes one afternoon and, in this sickly sweet voice, told me that, the lake has been the heart of our community for 20 years, dear, and we'd hate for a newcomer to break that tradition. I tried to be reasonable. I really did. I told her I didn't oppose. T mind a few visitors if they asked first, but I couldn't oppose. T of strangers roaming my land at 2 a.m. Her smile didn't oppose. T just fade, it curdled. She looked at me and said, Mr. Henderson understood the value of a shared landscape, and if you choose to be difficult, the board will have no choice but to ensure our community's interests are protected. It was a threat, plain and simple, delivered with a side of peppermint breath. The breaking point happened on a Saturday in July. I'd been out running errands, and when I pulled into my driveway, I couldn't oppose to even get to my garage because there were 6 SUVs parked on my grass. I walked around to the lakefront, and my jaw literally hit the dirt. There were at least 20 people there, a full-blown birthday party for Beverly's grandson. They had a massive inflatable water slide hooked up to my outdoor faucet, a DJ setup blasting top 40 hits, and coolers of beer everywhere. Nobody had called. Nobody had texted. They just moved in. When I found Beverly, she was holding a mimosa and had the audacity to ask me if I had any extra ice. I told her right then and there to get everyone off my property in 15 minutes, or I was calling the sheriff. And she just laughed in my face, telling me the HOA had an, implied easement, because of historical use. That was the last straw. That Monday, I didn't oppose. To go to work, I went to a local fencing contractor and told them I wanted the sturdiest, most intimidating iron fence they could build, with a gate that required a key code and a physical lock. I also called a buddy of mine who's a real estate attorney, and he laughed when I told him about Beverly's, implied easement. He checked the deed, the original plot maps, and the HOA bylaws, and confirmed what I already knew. The lake was 100% mine, there was no easement recorded, and the HOA had zero jurisdiction over my private acreage. When the contractors started digging the post holes, the neighborhood went into a frenzy. I saw people watching from their windows with binoculars, and by the time the gate was being welded into place, Beverly's Lexus came screaming up my gravel driveway, kicking up a cloud of dust that nearly choked the workers. She jumped out, followed by two other board members who looked like her personal henchmen, and she started screaming before her door was even shut. You can oppose. Do this. This is a violation of community standards. I have rights to this water. And, she was shaking, her face a terrifying shade of magenta, and she tried to physically block the contractor from finishing the gate. I walked down there with a folder containing my deed and a letter from my attorney. I told her, Beverly, you have the right to stay on the public road, but you don't oppose. Have the right to my lake. The party's over. She looked at the fence, then at me, and whispered with so much venom I thought she might spit on me. You and oppose. V just made the biggest mistake of your life. We will fine you in a bankruptcy. We will make sure you never have a peaceful night in this house again. And for the next 2 weeks, she tried her best. I started getting, violation notices, every single day, $500 for, unauthorized structure, $250 for, inappropriate landscaping, even a $100 fine for my, aggressive, mailbox. It totaled nearly $3,000 in 10 days. But I wasn't oppose. Just sitting there taking it. I'd installed high-def security cameras with night vision all along the fence line, and I was just waiting for her to trip up. The climax of this whole nightmare happened at the monthly HOA meeting at the community center. The room was packed. You could feel the heat of everyone's staring eyes. Beverly stood at the podium like she was the Queen of England, talking about, preserving our heritage, dealing with a hostile element, When it was my turn to speak, I didn't oppose. TL. I just walked up with my lawyer and a laptop. My lawyer stood there and calmly explained that every single fine they'd issued was a direct violation of state law and that we were preparing a massive harassment lawsuit against the board members individually, not just the HOA, but them personally. The room went silent. Then I turned the laptop around and played a video for everyone to see. It was from 2 nights prior at 3 a.m. It showed a man in a hooded sweatshirt, who was very clearly Beverly's husband, Gary, sneaking onto my property with a pair of bolt cutters, trying to take out my new lock, and when he couldn't oppose, he started spray painting, selfish, across my gate. The video was crystal clear. You could see his face, his shoes, even the logo on his hat. The silence in that room was so heavy you could hear Beverly's jewelry rattling because she was shaking so hard. Then an older woman named Mrs. Gable, who'd lived there even longer than Beverly, stood up and said, Beverly, you and oppose. You've been a bully for 15 years, but this is a crime. You've used our dues to fight your personal vendettas, and I for one am done. It was like a dam broke. Neighbor after neighbor started shouting, complaining about how Beverly had controlled them, and by the end of the night, the board had effectively dissolved. A week later, Gary was charged with third-degree mischief, and Beverly resigned from the HOA in disgrace. She ended up putting her house on the market a month later because she couldn't and oppose T handle the social chill of her neighbors finally seeing her for who she was. The best part? Her daughter, who had the birthday party, actually came over to apologize. She told me she had no idea her mom didn't and oppose T have permission and that she was mortified. We ended up talking for 2 hours, and I realized she wasn't oppose T the problem. Her mom's obsession with power was. Now, the gate is still there, and it stays locked 95% of the time, but something changed. A few weeks ago, a guy named Mike from down the street came over with his 7-year-old son. They didn't and oppose T just walk in. They knocked on my front door and asked if they could fish for an hour, promising to clean up any trash they found. I looked at the kid's face. He was holding a little plastic fishing pole, and I realized I didn't and oppose T won't be a hermit. I just wanted respect. I told them they could come every Saturday morning as long as they checked in first. Word got around, and now there's a small group of neighbors who help me maintain the trail around the lake in exchange for occasional access. The lake is still my private paradise, but it's a lot more peaceful now that the boundaries are built out of iron. It makes me wonder, though, did I win because I was right, or did I just have the bigger cage? Some people in the comments are probably going to say I'm still the jerk for locking out a whole community, while others will say I should have sued Beverly for every dime she had. So what do you think? Was I wrong to put up the fence and end a 20-year tradition, or is a man's home truly his castle, no matter how many mimosas the neighbor has had? Drop a comment below. Let me know if you've ever had an HOA from hell and Don and Oppos. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more stories where the Karen finally gets what's coming to her. I'll see you in the next one.